And now I'm happy to welcome a panel of experts from across the industry. Jennifer Safavian is President and CEO of Autos Drive America. Autos Drive America represents a number of foreign car makers with factories in the U.S. Jeff Farrah is the Executive Director of the Autonomous Vehicle Industry Association. Stephanie Brinley is the Associate Director of Research and Analysis at S&P Global Mobility. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
I want to start off with Jennifer. I'm just wondering, what challenges do you see facing the electric vehicle rollout in the coming years?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me join you today. And this is obviously very important. I can tell you, I can speak on behalf of my members, the international automakers with operations here in the U.S., that they are working very hard to produce numerous different models and vehicle choices for consumers in the clean vehicle realm of options. And the Inflation Reduction Act, was passed with, I think, the intention of trying to get more of that done here in the U.S. and get more of those vehicles on the road. And I would say that I think, a lot of the concerns we have are with kind of how the law was drafted and kind of the implementation of it. There are a lot of requirements in order for a vehicle to be eligible to receive a $7,500 tax credit. And I think it's just, making sure that everybody understands what those requirements are, especially consumers. I can tell you from the manufacturer's perspective, they are still trying to understand what all of those requirements are. We're still waiting for the Treasury Department to put out guidance on all the different restrictions. And so for consumers, who we're all hoping will purchase these vehicles and get more of these vehicles on the road, it's very confusing for them because the restrictions change depending on the time of the year, depending on exactly what we're talking about. And so there's a lot of confusion, and trying to figure out how best to explain that to consumers so they can get the vehicle that they need, that their families need, and that they might need for their business.
And once those restrictions surrounding battery component manufacturing and battery minerals go into effect, will your members have any vehicles that qualify for the consumer tax credit?
That's an excellent question. I will tell you, I think, today there are over like 70 different clean vehicle models available out there. And, I think right now, the beginning of this year, we have certain restrictions like MSRP requirements on the vehicle. You've got individual purchasers, determining what their income level is. Those are some additional restrictions that went into effect at the beginning of the year to determine whether or not a vehicle or the individual purchasing the vehicle can receive the credit. And I would say, so from about 70 possible options that are out there right now, there are about maybe 25 that potentially can receive the credit right now. We are still waiting for the Treasury Department to put guidance out on the critical minerals and the battery components pieces of this, and that's supposed to come out sometime next month in March. And so once that information comes out, so we exactly know, what countries those critical minerals can come from, and what constitutes a battery component, then we'll be able to determine which vehicles qualify once we have all that guidance out. I fully suspect that the number of 25 that are eligible right now today may not be all eligible come next month once the guidance comes out. And then some of them may be eligible for half of the credit, maybe $3,750, or maybe none of the credit. So it's really important that this guidance comes out and that it's very clear from the Treasury Department so that manufacturers understand what is necessary for vehicles to qualify. And of course, again, for consumers to understand what vehicles qualify for the credits.
Got it. Jeff, I wanted to turn to you now. How far are we from, widespread commercial adoption of autonomous vehicles? Is that something that we could see in the near future, and why or why not?
I think for many years, the question was, when are autonomous vehicles going to be here? And our industry is very proud to say they are here right now. If you look in the ride-hailing space, you can go to places like Phoenix, Arizona, San Francisco, other places around the country. You can ride in these passenger vehicles now. I think you had an earlier guest on who's a founder of a company called Wabi that's in the AV trucking space. There is autonomous trucking that is happening now in places around the country. You certainly see a lot of commercial partnerships that are being inked, and companies that are coming online that are moving goods all around the country. You see shuttles that are run autonomously. These are taking place in places like residential parks in Florida, universities in Michigan. You see unmanned delivery pods that are delivering things like groceries and pizza and fast food autonomously. And so this is all rolling out quite quickly. It's something where the industry has made very steady progress from a technological perspective for a number of years. And so now we're beginning to see a lot of the safety, mobility, supply chain, and environmental benefits that AVs have been promising for a long time. So the future is very exciting.
And what is that future? Where is it going, and what is next for autonomous vehicles?
We're in a situation where for about a dozen years or so, AV companies have been testing on American roads. There has been billions of dollars that has been deployed into a lot of these vehicles. And so you have a diverse set of use cases now that are solving a lot of challenges that we have. One thing about AV companies is they completely reject the status quo in terms of how it is we're being served right now in the transportation sector. They realize that the autonomous future is going to make us safer. It's going to make everyone's lives a lot easier. And so they are rolling forward with that in a variety of different applications. It'll be fascinating to see in 10 years or so where we are now in terms of the applications that haven't even been thought of. Because I think that one thing is clear is that autonomy comes in and solves a lot of problems. And you have entrepreneurs and you have companies that are thinking about how it is they can apply this technology and ultimately solve use cases for Americans.
Got it. Stephanie, I want to go to you also looking towards the future. What do you think, what is the forecast for electric vehicle adoption, and when might we see, most Americans driving electric vehicles, if ever?
Well, ever will happen, right? Our forecast, our most recent forecast looks at about 42% EV adoption in 2030. So that's where we've sort of hung our hat at the moment. But we still have all day long. Your program has been talking about some of the challenges that need to be addressed. And certainly the charging infrastructure is one of them. I like Jennifer's comments about consumers needing to understand what those tax credits really are. It is incredibly complicated, and it needs to be fed to the consumer in a way that makes sense to them, because trying to get a consumer to understand if they need to know where their battery is made, where the critical materials are coming from, they don't understand right now where their engine came from. They're not going to get this, not on that level. So it has to be presented to consumers in a way that makes sense to them, so they can just be like, oh, I went to the website, my car applies or doesn't. So that needs to happen as part of this process. The infrastructure bill certainly is about encouraging North American and U.S. manufacturing. That is where the bottom line is for that. I feel like more so even than encouraging the electric vehicle adoption, that bill is about encouraging manufacturing first. So that's one of the things that needs to happen in there. Autonomous vehicles are coming, as Jeff says. But I think we're seeing that rollout happen in a very safe way, in a very logical way, but not quite at the pace that sort of was envisioned if we go back to 2018 or 2019 and this whole, by 2025, some number of cities and people will stop driving their cars and they'll just shift to ride hailing by autonomous very quickly. It is coming, but it's coming much more slowly than that sort of utopian view that popped up and we sat there. We talked about that with electric vehicles too. There's this magic moment that we're just going to flip the switch. And the reality is there's a lot of infrastructure, there's a lot of manufacturing, there's a lot of consumer education. There's a lot of things that have to happen to make all of these things come into place. We're not looking at a 5-year horizon. We're looking at 10, 15, 20, 30 years to really get these things integrated and understood and within a part of a fabric of our society. So we're all moving in the right direction, but this isn't a short-term game. It's not a 5-year game. It's not a 10-year game.
I want to just hop in, Bob Cusack, and this is a great panel. We live in very polarizing time. Masks have become political. Vaccines have become political. Education and transportation, which used to be a lot more bipartisan, have become a lot more political. So I wanted to get to a question by Karen Sheffield, who sent in, and this can go to any of the panelists who want to jump in. How do the panelists view the role of strong collaboration and bipartisanship in ensuring an effective transition? Because as you just mentioned, we were talking about this is implementation over many years. And if this polarization continues, could it be really damaging to the transition? Anyone want to jump in on that?
I think it could be an issue, but I think more important is that the president has said this is what the target is, and on a broader level, even if there's some bipartisan issues on exactly what is applied where, if the goal is still in that general direction, we can still move on that path. Because what happens once you set that goal? Businesses behind it. Consumers are interested in making this transition. Not everybody's on board yet, but they're getting interested and they're going to learn. So it's a matter of putting that North Star up there. And we may see partisan things impact how the money is spent, who gets money when, and that can cause some problems. But I think those are kind of growing pains. And ultimately, if the agreed upon goal is shifting to electric vehicles, the bipartisanship should be able to be overcome over time. Because again, we're not talking 5 years. We're not talking one presidential administration. We're talking 7, 8, 9. So we have to be able to get over it ultimately.
I think one thing to add here is that I think there's a lot of bipartisan cooperation as it relates to emerging technologies. I testified before the Energy and Commerce Committee last week, and I was very struck by the bipartisan tone, a lot of the cooperation that needs to go on. I think a lot of lawmakers are putting this in the context of global competition for American leadership on technology. They realize that we are far from the only country that is pursuing emerging technology like in autonomous vehicles. And they know that we all need to be rowing in the same direction if we're going to be a leader on this issue. And so while there's certainly a lot of complaining that goes on at the public surface, like they're ultimately below the surface in the committee level within Congress, you really see a lot of cooperation because people realize there's a lot at stake.
And I'll just jump in real quick and just add, I think, a broader perspective on this. I agree with everything that's been said, but I would just look at it also from a global, more international perspective. I mean, this is something that if we really want to transition to clean vehicles, like we're talking about, this needs to be done not just here in the United States, it needs to be done globally. And it's important that we work closely with our allies when it comes to this transition. That's one of the things that I know, you've heard from some of our closest allies, the EU, Japan, Korea, South Korea, talking about their concerns with the Inflation Reduction Act, because in order for us to get critical minerals and battery components that are needed for these vehicles that we're talking about, we need to depend on our closest allies and help rely and use the resources they have until we have more resources here in the United States. It's going to take time to do more of it here in North America, and in the meantime, it's important that we do work with our closest allies to help us all achieve our shared climate goals.
And how soon could that be? How far away are most electric vehicles from meeting those requirements in the IRA? And when, again, if ever, might most electric vehicles qualify for those tax credits?
It's really, that is such a hard question to answer, and it gets asked all the time. And again, the reason comes down to the fact that we are really waiting for the Treasury Department to put out final guidance on exactly what is a critical mineral, right? Where does that line drawn between what's a critical mineral and what's a battery component? And the reason why that's important is because your critical minerals, as soon as this guidance comes out, 40% of the vehicle's critical minerals needs to come from the U.S. or from a country that we have an FTA, a free trade agreement with. And so until we know what is considered a free trade agreement, because that's not defined anywhere, knowing where you can get these critical minerals from is critically important. And the same goes with the battery component piece of this. That has to be done in North America. And that's 50% requirement starting as soon as the guidance comes out. So that's why it's really difficult to know exactly how many vehicles will qualify until we know more about kind of where they're going to draw these lines on what is considered a critical mineral, what's considered a battery component.
And to Jennifer's point, finding that guidance and making that clear is just critical, but then it also escalates over the period up until 2030 and 2032. So it's built in a way that you can build up that manufacturing base, but that takes time. Again, I mean, this is going to be the overriding, I think, theme of this conversation, is everything that we want to do takes more time than people sort of want to hear that it's going to take. Making the kinds of changes that are being asked for, it's maybe the right thing to ask for, but it's going to take time to get there. And as these different requirements come in and phase in and get more and more difficult over time, that's going to be part of it too. We may have a car that at 40% works, but in a couple of years, when you're at 80%, it doesn't work. and it doesn't quite need it. One of the other side things for this, though, too, is automakers still have not changed from the basic idea that it's very much best to build where you sell. This is why we have, Jeff, for so many of your organizations building here. And I think as we go, if we get to a 42%, 50%, 60%, 70% EV take rate in the United States, we're going to see this production follow. What the IRA can do is kind of jumpstart by putting an incentive on the automakers to do it now instead of doing it in 2028 or 2030. So we've got that push and pull in there. It's going to take a long time to really suss out which cars are going to make it, which cars aren't. And it's an interesting bill to me because I feel like it's also designed so you don't have to give out as many tax credits for as long as possible. It's going to be a while before these vehicles come in. And I think, too, one of the things that's going to make a bigger, almost more important to me than incentives per se is the fact that we have so many vehicles coming in so many price points and so much choice. The more that we have that, the more that consumers see them, the more that consumers get to work with them, the more that the EV infrastructures, however that's coming, whatever company is involved, however the business model shakes out, the more that comes into play. And all of this comes together to move things much more rapidly. So in some respects, I think the other things ultimately are more important even than incentives for a consumer. Having that choice. And we already have electric vehicles that you can get for $30,000. It's maybe not the right size at the moment. So, we got more coming in that space. So I think that those things are going to drive the acceptance of electric vehicles at a consumer level even more than incentive is. An incentive is how you kind of get there. But the consumer desire for that is going to come from it being the vehicle that they want in their driveway.
Mm-hmm. And so with all of that in mind, do you think the IRA is going to help electric vehicle deployment or no? Because like you guys said, it might be tough to meet some of these requirements. Is it actually going to be a hindrance?
I don't think it'll be a hindrance. I think it will help. But I don't think that it's a jumpstart. I don't think that it flips things on a dime again. It still takes time. It doesn't necessarily take away the fact that it takes time to start up a lithium mine. You can't legislate that out of existence. So it does help. I don't think it hinders the process at all, but it isn't also at the same time super easy to work through.
Mm-hmm. And on the autonomous side, are we most looking next at applications, in the commercial space for things like you mentioned, like food deliveries and that kind of thing, or are we looking more at consumer purchases?
I think the great news right now is that it is all of the above. I mean, we are a relatively young industry where there's a lot of enthusiasm for tackling a lot of problems. And so, you do, as I said, see a lot of situations where people are looking in the passenger car space at things like ride hailing, autonomous trucking, shuttles, delivery pods, and whatnot. And so this is something where I think that the technology is essentially the same, which is producing an automated driving system that removes the human from the interaction. The great news about that is that we know that we've had this persistent problem in this country of traffic fatalities. All the technology that we have now in our cars doesn't seem to be pushing that number down. And so we need to really shift the paradigm here and remove the human from the basic equation. That is what our members are doing in terms of producing the automated driving system. And then people get to think very creatively about what the applications ultimately are going to be for that. And so in terms of how people are going to see this in their neighborhoods, it's really going to depend on where you sit. I think also the reality is that we need to make sure that we've got a federal government partner that is helping for the deployment and the commercialization of these technologies, because the private sector has certainly put in billions of dollars. A lot of ingenuity has gone into it. And we need to make sure that we are modernizing both from a federal legislative perspective and from a regulatory perspective to get really ready for all of this and make sure that innovators understand that there's the ability to move forward and deploy and commercialize this technology.
Our thanks to Jennifer Safavian, President and CEO of Autos Drive America, Jeff Farrah, Executive Director of the Autonomous Vehicle Industry Association, and Stephanie Brinley, the Associate Director of Research and Analysis at S&P Global Mobility.